The long exhale, cold water in the face, the walk, the hum, the somatic shaking. If you're anywhere near the world of nervous system regulation, you know the toolkit, and I will say it plainly before anything else. The tools work. I use them. And yet, the same dread is back the next morning at the same hour over the same email, no matter how well you breathed the day before. Some of you know a stranger version of this. Nothing trips anymore. You are not anxious, you are just flat. Both of these have the same explanation. Before your body picks a state, it checks something, and regulation never touches what it checks. I want to show you what your body actually consults before it decides to sound the alarm, why the breathing cannot change what it finds there, and the one kind of input that can. To do that, I need to show you a breaker box. There is one in most homes tucked into a basement or a hallway closet, and most of the time you forget it exists. Then one evening, the kettle is on, the heater is running, the lights are on in 3 rooms, and you plug in one more thing and the room goes dark. The breaker trips. So you find the box, find the single switch that has flipped out of line with the others, push it back, and the house comes alive again. It holds for a while, then at roughly the same point the next evening, it trips again. A lot of us have started treating our own bodies the way we treat that breaker. The language of regulation has moved out of clinics and into ordinary conversation. We talk about fight or flight, about being dysregulated, about ventral vagal states and the vagus nerve. We have learned that the tight chest before a difficult email is not a character flaw, but a body shifting into a protective state. And we have learned what to do about it, which is where the toolkit comes in. These things genuinely help. That is not the problem. Here's what I mean by second, not first. Something asks the body a question and the body answers with a state. The breath, the plunge, the walk, those are all ways of changing the answer. They're good ways, but they leave the question exactly where it was. And if the same question keeps getting asked, the body keeps giving the same answer, and you can spend years becoming very skilled at flipping a breaker that was only ever reporting a load somewhere upstream. This matters now because the tools have become so good and so available that it is easy to mistake managing a state for solving a problem. A regulation routine has quietly become the new morning workout. There is the breathing, the cold exposure, the somatic shaking, the app that tracks your heart rate variability overnight, and there is nothing wrong with any of it, but something can be done perfectly and still leave your life untouched. You can become genuinely excellent at returning your body to calm and still walk into the exact same dread the next day because the calm was aimed at the symptom and the situation that produced it was never the target. Now, someone could hear this as me being dismissive of the somatic work, and I want to be careful because that would be wrong. The inside underneath all of this is real. The body does carry the residue of stress. A dysregulated body thinks worse, decides worth, and remembers worth. When people say you cannot reason your way out of a state your body is locked inside, sometimes that is true, and more than sometimes. If you are in genuine fight or flight, the calm upstream conversation I'm about to describe is not even available to you yet. You often have to regulate first, just to get back access to your own thinking. So the tools are not a detour. They are frequently the necessary first step. What I am questioning is the belief that they are the whole staircase. Much of the popular language here traces back to polyvagal theory, developed by the neuroscientist Stephen Porges which maps different vagal states into different modes of feeling and behaving. And here, I want to be honest about what is solid and what is not, because it matters for the whole argument. The specific anatomical and evolutionary claims in that theory are genuinely contested. Researchers like Paul Grossman have challenged in detail the idea that a particular myelinated vagal circuit evolved to produce our social states in the way the theory describes. That part of the map is genuinely disputed, and the dispute itself points to what actually matters. But notice what does survive the dispute, because it is older than polyvagal theory and does not depend on it. Long before Porges, researchers like Richard Lazarus were showing something quieter and sturdier. The body's response follows the reading you make of a situation, not the raw situation itself. The state is not the origin. The state is a reply. Two people meet the same email and their bodies answer completely differently because they are answering two different readings of it. Appraisal theory has its own critics, and the fight over whether feeling can outrun thinking is a real one. But the practical core, that the same event lands differently depending on the reading it meets, is about as sturdy as psychology gets. That is the load-bearing idea here, and it stands whether or not the specific vagal wiring turns out to be right. Which quietly moves the important question. It moves it away from how do I change the state and toward a harder one. What is my body actually replying to? And here the research gets specific in a way that most of the regulation conversation never touches. The reading your body answers is not a general mood about the world. It is most of the time the answer to one narrow question. Can I handle what is about to happen? Albert Bandura called this belief self-efficacy, and I dig into it properly in the video about the formula that decides whether you act. What matters here is the one part most people skip. That belief is not a temperament and not a self-image. It is built from a specific raw material, and the raw material is evidence. Times you did the thing or something like it and it went well enough. Your body is not asking whether you are calm, it is checking a record. And on the specific thing that trips you, the record may simply be empty. So there is a chain and it runs in one direction. Evidence of handling things builds the belief that you can handle this. That belief sets the reading. The reading sets the state. The breath and the cold water enter at the very last link, the state, which is why they work for an hour and why the same thread is back the next morning. Nothing upstream has moved. The record your body checked at 7 is the same record it checks at 9. Regulation gives you a steadier hand on the switch. It does not add a single line to the record. This also explains a confusion almost everyone has felt from the inside. The feeling of confidence and the fact of capability are two different things, and they come apart in both directions. You can feel perfectly calm walking into something you are unprepared for. Borrowed calm, and the day will correct you. And you can feel terrified walking into something you're demonstrably able to do. Every competent person with stage fright knows that one. The alarm is not reporting your ability, it is reporting the state of the file. If the file on this specific kind of moment is thin, the alarm is loud, and it is being accurate about the file even when it is wrong about you. That is worth sitting with, because it means the alarm is not broken and does not need to be silenced. It needs to be shown something. I lived the shallow version of this while I was launching a book and the app that goes with it. In the mornings, before I posted anything or shipped anything, my chest would tighten and my breathing would climb into the top of my lungs. So I did the tools, the long exhale, the walk around the block, and they worked. For about an hour, I felt steady and clear. Then the dread came back every single time because on the specific act of putting my own thinking in front of strangers, my record was nearly blank and my body knew it even while my breathing was perfect. What actually moved me was not more regulation, it was putting rough, unfinished versions of the work in front of a few real people early while the stakes were still small and the feedback was still cheap, and then watching the consequences I had rehearsed so carefully simply fail to show up. Nobody's life ended, mine didn't either. And each small round of that did something no exhale had ever done. It went into the file, not as reassurance. My own pep talks had never once been admitted as evidence, but as a fact. He did the thing, and he is still there. After enough entries, the morning question, can I handle this, started returning a different answer, and the state that used to arrive with my coffee simply stopped being sent. That was a paper cut of a stick, and I called it one on purpose. Not every load on that circuit is small, and I will come back to the ones that are not. So the practical question is not how to get calmer, it is what evidence your body is working from. When something trips you at the same point every day, ask it directly. When did I last hand my body proof that I can do this specific thing? Not proof that I am smart, not proof that people like me. Proof on this circuit. If the honest answer is never, then the state is not a malfunction, and treating it like one is unfair to your own alarm system. It is an accurate report on an empty file. And an empty file has exactly one remedy. Not insight. Insight never gets filled. A deposit. The smallest real version of the thing actually done, where reality can respond to it. The alarm does not update on argument, it updates on record. But I have been describing a breaker that trips too easily, and I know that it's not everyone's problem. For some of you, the breaker doesn't trip anymore. It stopped years ago. It just hums flat. You are not anxious, you are hollow. And the chain explains this and too. Read in the other direction. A body is only asked the question, can I handle this, when something you care about is genuinely at stake. If your life has been arranged carefully, competently over years so that nothing you truly care about is ever exposed to uncertainty, then the question stops being asked at all. No question, no state. The flat hum is not peace. It is a nervous system with nothing on the line. And the move there is not regulation either, and it is not another entry in an already thick file. It is a stake, something small that you actually want, placed back where it can fail. The aliveness people chase through cold plunges comes back on its own the moment an honest question is being asked of you again. And then there is the other end entirely, and I have to enter that room too because I opened on a launch, and a launch is not a catastrophe. Some breakers were tripped by something real, a death, an addiction, a marriage ending, a body that stopped working the way it used to. For a wound like that, the load genuinely was survival level, and no file of small wins closed it in a week. The sentence written after real loss, I should have been able to stop it, I will never have that again, it was my fault, is not a thin file. It is a true weight, and the honest thing to say is that the work there is slow and partial and takes years, not one cheap test. You do not rewrite grief in the shower. What is the same, and only this is the same, is the direction of the work. Even there, some of the sentence is the real weight of what happened, and some of it is a verdict that attached itself to the loss and kept adding weight. A judgment about your work passed in the worst hour by the least fair judge you will ever face. Separating the weight from the verdict is the labor of years, and it is never fully finished. That is not a technique anyone can hand you. What is real is the distinction itself, even when pulling the two apart takes the rest of your life. So I want to be precise because the wrong version of this message is genuinely dangerous. The answer is not that the breaker is always wrong and you should just override it. When the reading is correct, a tripping breaker is the system doing its job, and the right move is to reduce the load or to rest, not to talk yourself out of real danger. Regulation is not the enemy here. Treating regulation as the entire answer is the trap. The point of calming the body is not to avoid looking upstream. It is to get calm enough to look clearly and then to act on what you see. Because here is what the daily flip quietly becomes if it is the only practice you have. It becomes a way of living indefinitely on a file that never grows. You get better and better at managing the state, and the record that produces the state stays exactly as thin as it was. So the same question keeps returning the same answer, and the same breaker keeps tripping at the same hour. The load on the circuit is not fixed because the file is not finished. That is the part I find genuinely hopeful. Your body is scrupulously honest. It will never pretend the evidence is there when it is not, and it will never ignore the evidence once it is. You are, at least in part, the electrician of your own house, not because you can talk a breaker out of tripping, but because you decide what runs through the wiring next. If you want the longer version of how that record gets built, I put it in a book called Master Your Life Script, but you do not need it for what I am about to ask you to do. So I'm not going to end on a question. This whole argument says the file only accepts one kind of entry, and a question is not one. So I am going to ask you for a small, external, slightly uncomfortable deposit instead. The way the small test was the only thing that ever moved me. Pick the one breaker you already know trips at roughly the same time most days. The message you reread 6 times, the task you circle all afternoon, the honest thing you keep not saying. Ask the file question once. When did my body last see proof on this exact circuit that I can do this? And then today, before you have decided what it means, take the smallest real version of the thing you are avoiding and put it into the world where someone can actually respond to it. Send the rough draft to one person. Say the one honest sentence in the meeting. Post the unfinished thought. Not the polished version. Not tomorrow. Not once you feel ready. The small unfinished version today while the stakes are still cheap. Then watch what your body does with the fact that comes back. The file accepts only one kind of entry. Something that actually happened. And you can hand it one before tonight.